breaking news, vital journalism, quizzes, videos, celeb news, listicles, and more. With the increasingly digital nature of audiences, how and why we engage with literary work online is more important than ever before. Online publishing isn't all fluff and clickbait. There's the fresh writing, pop culture hot takes, reviews, meta, and top 10s that keep us scrolling. Join Patrick Lenton and Giselle Au-Nhien Nguyen as we take a deep dive into the ways people consume, produce, and transform media, and how online literary work is just as valued and disciplined as an op-ed in any print media. Giselle Au-Nhien Nguyen is a Vietnamese-Australian writer and critic based in Melbourne. Her work has been featured in publications including The Lenton, The Saturday Paper, Kill Your Darlings, SBS, and Frankie. She was an inaugural recipient of the Wheeler Centre's Next Chapter Fellowship in 2018. Patrick Lenton is a writer, journalist, and author living in Sydney, Australia. He is the editor of pop culture and entertainment publication Junkie. He has a book of short stories called A Man Made Entirely of Bats and a collection of comedic essays called Uncle Hercules and Other Lies. Giselle and Patrick join us now for Chris Hemsworth's biceps. Great. Now we have your attention.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Giselle.
Hi, Patrick. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
And I would like to pay my respects to the Eastern Ma people of the Kulin Nation, whose lands I'm currently on today. Sovereignty was never ceded. Yes, hi.
Hello. So we're talking about Hemsworth's abs and online media. Yeah.
So I guess that we both write and edit online news publications and have done so for quite a few years. In fact, I was just thinking the first time me and Giselle, because if people don't know, me and Giselle are best friends. So
people don't know this is like celebs. In case you didn't know.
Yeah, everyone knows it. Yeah. I mean, and one of the very first interactions we ever had was when I slid into Giselle's DMs and started hassling her for information about how much Vice pays freelancers, because I knew that Giselle had published with Vice, and I felt like they were trying to stiff me for a cheaper pay than I felt like I deserved. And that's what digital media is all about in the end. People coming together and getting underpaid.
And also another of our first interactions was on a panel, just like this one. And that's full circle. Love that. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So yes, it's true. We have both published online and offline for many years. So Patrick, do you want to tell the people about your history and what kind of stuff you're doing or have done?
Yeah. So as my hand.
Just to rudely interrupt, if anybody has any questions, just chuck them in the little chat thing and we'll just deal with them as they come. So you don't need to wait till the end. Got any burning questions, chuck them in. If it's a comment, don't do it. Okay, go, Patrick.
As my handy little bio said, I guess the majority of what I'll be talking about today is from the perspective of being the editor of Junkie, which is, if you're not certain, an online news and entertainment and pop culture publication with a, with a youth demographic, and I've been working there for a bit over 3 years now. Started off as a weekend contractor, and then eventually went into staff writer, entertainment editor, and now editor. And before that, I was a freelancer for a couple, maybe 2-3 years, and I wrote for a lot of different places, a lot of online publications. Like I wrote for Junkie, I wrote for Vice. I never wrote for Pedestrian, and I wrote for a lot of daily life stuff, which was the Sydney Morning Herald's like online kind of like women's,
like lifestyle, I guess.
Yeah.
Pretty feminist leaning, I guess.
Yeah. I mostly wrote stuff there about being very queer. It was great. Anyway, so that's my whole sort of perspective. What about yours, Giselle?
So I have been freelancing for 5 years or so, 5 or 6 years, and I was also a columnist at Daily Life. So a lot of that was op-ed or like personal essay type stuff. But I've also these days I do mostly arts criticism, books and music is mostly my thing, and it's a mix of mainstream and kind of smaller journal type publications, but a lot of it is online. I would say the majority of it is online, actually. So I guess a question for you, Patrick, would be, in the 3 years that you've been at Junkie, what do you think has changed about online publishing?
I think there's been huge changes in like, I don't even know if changes. There's been like ebbs and flows in what's sort of popular and how like online, especially like online youth media has really changed, because like 3 years ago when I started at Junkie, like BuzzFeed Australia was still existed, you know, like Vice Australia still existed, and they were both like two of our biggest competitors. And like BuzzFeed was like massively into quizzes then, and like and Vice was like doing heaps of their sort of like video content, and it was really seen as like a kind of boom time for online youth sort of media. And now BuzzFeed Australia doesn't really exist in the same capacity as it did then. Like they really only have a commercial arm now. They don't report any Australian news or content. They've only hired they only have a couple of staff members. Vice Australia is also gone, and Vice as a sort of media conglomerate has kind of like really shifted and downsized. So like I think probably the answer to that is the huge boom kind of went bust in the last 3 years, and just many digital publications either went completely under or fired all their staff or moved out of Australia, which is super depressing. That's a really depressing answer, but it's also really, really true.
Yeah. But in terms of the content that you were producing and you are producing now, do you feel like it's changed much?
There's also like ups and downs in that as well. Like I feel like some of the things that we did 3 years ago wouldn't be like, it would be seen as kind of hacky now. Like actually, you know what's gone down in sort of popularity is like op-eds, which both you and I kind of cut our teeth on. Like I don't tend to commission those kind of like first person perspective op-eds anymore. Like now when I get an opinion writer to write for me, it will be about something that they are uniquely qualified to have a take on, and to like provide use their voice as part of their reasoning and their argument, rather than just kind of being like, I'm telling my story and that's the goal of the of the piece.
Well, I think, to be honest, I feel like that's what op-eds always should have been, but they haven't always been. And this is kind of like me just going on a whole separate rant. But I think that there was this period in online publishing where everything was like first person essays, especially by women. There's a few really good articles online about this. If any listeners want to jot them down and have a look. There's one on Slate called The First Person Industrial Complex, and there's one on Overland by Amy Gray called The Bustle Hustle. And basically it's just about how there was this period where it seemed like the only way for young women in particular to get published was by sort of like mining your life and your trauma and writing about it. And that really is what I was doing for daily life, like just writing about myself constantly. But I think what I have learned over the years, especially because at the time I was in my 20s and now I'm not, and I just have a different perspective on things now. But I think that it is okay to sort of think about the implications of what you're writing. Like, why are you writing it? What purpose are you writing it for? And does it tie into a bigger conversation or not? And how could this affect you in the future? Because I think some people have written things that are pretty intense and about really personal things. And the thing is that the internet simply does not forget. So once that's out there, it's always out there. I think probably there's also an essay by Gia Tolentino on the New Yorker about like the end of the personal essays. So maybe this period has passed now. But I do think that that's something that is actually pretty unique to online media, because those things are so easily shareable. Yeah, don't know if that was totally off topic, but I feel like, yeah, when we're talking about first person op-ed type stuff, that's like kind of it. And I agree that it's not as rife as it used to be. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. And we've also got some questions, but we'll get to those in a second, because I just want to follow this for a little bit longer. So if you don't write as many op-eds anymore, or any at all, and you also don't want to particularly do that to yourself anymore, what is the kind of stuff that you are mostly commissioned to write for online publications?
To be honest, people still ask me to write about that kind of stuff, but I don't always want to, but it doesn't mean that I never will. And I guess I am in a fortunate position where I've got a day job and stuff, so I don't need like constant commissions to live. So, but people do still ask me to write, like, from your perspective as like a insert identity person, what do you think about this? I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se, but I would advise strongly against anyone making that their entire practice. I think sometimes it does come into it though. Like last year I wrote like a 3,000 word long critical response to a book, and that did bring some identity stuff in. So I don't mind doing it when it's relevant, but I just don't necessarily think that it's the first thing that people should reach for. Also, like when we talk about op-eds, there are some real bad ones out there. Like last year when the Age ran that one about some old man saying he like doesn't want to eat outside, you know.
Or last year there was one where a children's book author, I'm not going to name her, a children's book author published this piece about, during the bushfires, about how she believed that wombats were like herding other animals into their burrows to save them from the fire. And this was published under op-ed, but because it was in a reputable newspaper, people just were like, oh, cool, and went viral. And all these other news outlets just started pulling it, being like, oh my God, wombats are saving other animals. It was simply her opinion that this was happening. You know, like there is a genuine problem.
Wombats, unsung heroes of the bush.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Should we look at some of these questions? So someone says,
Yeah.
how do you keep from feeling behind in terms of the media landscape? Seems if even the smallest thing happens, everybody has a hot take / an article already written before you can even pitch. Okay, my answer to this is that it's actually okay to not have an opinion on everything. Because I think you can tell that, like, no, and I don't mean that in like a disparaging way, but I think there's been times where I've been asked to write about something and I'm like, I actually don't think I'm the best person to do this, you know? So I think it is actually important to think about what it is you have to say, if it's unique or if it's just the same thing everybody else is going to say. Yeah, so I think you actually don't have to have a hot take about everything, which is, I don't have a Twitter anymore, and that's really helped me like not immediately react to things. But that's not even the question. The question is, how do you keep from feeling behind? But the thing is that it's so like, so for instance, last year when Taylor Swift was like, surprise, I have an album coming, I got asked to review that at 10 a.m. and it came at 2 p.m., right? And I had to file by like 4. So I was like, okay, this is not going to be that considered of a review or analysis because I don't have that much time with it. But the reality of online and media moving as quickly as it does is that sometimes that happens. And then sometimes people just have to develop their better opinions or like more informed opinions later. I don't really know what the answer to that is though, because I personally really don't think that that's great, but that's just the nature of it, right?
From my perspective, as an editor, there are two things that I kind of take into consideration when something happens, and the first one is never who pitched to me the fastest. It's usually who has the best established voice on this. So when something breaks and it's like, oh, we're going to have to cover this. This is very much within Junkie's wheelhouse. Usually what I'll do is I'll reach out to someone who I can trust to write that for me immediately. So that's less about being like fast and always informed about everything. It's actually about being a trustworthy, competent, excellent writer and being a trusted voice in your field. So like, yeah, you know, this is a bad example, but when the McIver's baths turf war controversy sort of broke out, I actually didn't want to I didn't want to publish a hot take on that. I didn't want to like sort of feed into a culture war or anything. So I didn't go looking for someone to quickly write me something. I reached out to Liz Duck Chong, who's writing our gender euphoria, like trans news column for us, and said to her, what do you think needs to be added to this conversation? And she's like, yeah, I've got a piece in mind, but I don't want to publish it right now because I think it's, you know, it would be too hot takey. And I'm like, yep, sure, that sounds great. But then in the second thing, I got a pitch from a great writer who said, I want to write about my experience with this, with the baths from a trans perspective. And I was like, they weren't first. I'd actually had 3 pitches before that, but theirs was the best. So and was the most relevant. So I think it is less about having to be like the fastest person. That said, definitely sometimes with like when things have happened like trending and stuff, the very first person who reaches out to me and says, I've got a pitch, I will often be like, wonderful, let's do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing for people to keep in mind is that, and I'm not speaking for all publications, but for a lot of publications, for stuff like that, they'll probably have someone doing stuff in-house as well, rather than waiting for freelancers to wade through a bunch of pitches and reach out to someone external.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. That is very right. But usually that's around ease and trustworthiness, because like I have a handful of contributors who I would trust to be able to turn around something immediately, but my staff writers, I trust all of them to be able to turn around something immediately. That's their job. So sometimes I'll get a pitch and I'll be like, I don't know who you are. I don't know if you'll be able to give me this, give me a good copy by the end of the day when this needs to come out, or otherwise it's pointless. I think that, so it's less of a gamble.
Yeah. I guess this, since we're talking about fast, like getting articles up quickly after something big happens, something that I had wanted to talk to you about, Patrick, that others might be interested in, is about the actual editing process for online. Obviously, there's a shorter turnaround time. So, I mean, newspapers are different, but like magazines and stuff, often that production time is like months, weeks or months. Yeah. Whereas for online, it's like every day. Personally, as a writer, I really enjoy the experience of being thoroughly edited, but there is not always time for that with the fast nature of online publishing. So what's your perspective as a writer and an editor?
Yeah, it's a balance. I think that ideally I'd love to work for longer with people, but really from a business point of view, with how I do things, for an 800 to 1,200 word article, which is, you know, a junkie feature standard, more than 3 edits is not worth the time, you know, like for me, because that's getting into that means that I'm sinking so much time into it, and like time is actually my most precious resource. I'm not to, you know, play the tiny violin, but like I'm completely overworked all the time. I have no time to do anything, and so the features that I work on from contributors are often almost like they're almost passion projects for me, because like I believe in them, and I believe in working with the writer on them, and I would love to give more and more time, but sometimes it simply won't happen. Or like we just published a great review of Promising Young Woman by a writer named Michelle, who wrote a great first piece, and then I sent edits back, and then she wrote really, really excellent edits to that, which fitted in perfectly, but then had to wait a whole week, because in the time since those edits came back, I just had so much work that I had to put that on the very bottom of the list in terms of priority. So basically, yes, it is often a really quick turnaround in terms of edits, and sometimes even when I will commission someone, I'll be like, this has to go out today, so are you able to sit with me and go back and forth with edits today, or do you have a day job like a normal person, you know, like, because if you can't give me back those edits, then maybe I can't accept it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think personally, like I said, I really enjoy the experience of being edited, and I really do hope that for a lot of writers, it's something they do get to experience to its full extent, because I think the role of the editor really should be to make the piece as good as it can be. And some of my best editing experiences have kind of pointed out to me things that I haven't been able to see, especially when you've been so in something for ages that you can't be objective about it. But yeah, like I said, this doesn't always happen with online publications. Certainly not with like the big mainstream news ones. Like my experience of those are often, it just is published exactly the way that I sent it in. I would love to think that's because I'm perfect, but it's probably not. Yeah.
I remember publishing something for the Herald online, and the very first sentence was like, blah, 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 queer rights. I don't know if this sentence is any good. I'd written that and then meant to go back and change it, and I never did. And I sent that draft in, and it got published on the website as that. So they just taken my thing, copy and paste it, just put it up. Like that was
Love
horrific.
Love it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In my experience, here's another question from Indio. In my experience, people treat pop culture news sites like BuzzFeed, Junkie, etc., as not real journalism. Has it been hard for you to break this stigma and pursue topics you're passionate about? Okay, first of all, that actually really annoys me. Because in the past, I feel like people always used to dunk on BuzzFeed for being like a quiz site, but they were doing some pretty important stuff. Like when Generation was working there and writing a lot of really, really important stuff about like women's issues and abortion in Australia. I would say probably like the best stuff in Australia, really, on that stuff. So I think it's actually really annoying. We'll put it in that way.
And Lane Sainty's coverage of the marriage plebiscite, sort of survey, was amazing. Like that was the best reporting happening, you know. So yes, keep going.
I kind of think that it's the same as like old rock dogs who hate pop music, you know. Yeah. It's just such a like outdated and boring view of things that just because something's packaged differently might mean like they think that it means that it's not valid. But I think it's like, you know how like Teen Vogue is really good now? It's like that. Like Teen Vogue back when I was a teenager was like how to get boys to like you, and now it's like how to like burn a police station, you know, like love that. But I think in terms of the stigma, it's always going to exist, right? Like there's always going to be snobby, like literary people, but I don't think that should matter. Like if it's what you want to do and you know you have something good to say, then I reckon just go for it. And I think, like a website like Junkie, not to be biased because of my bestie here, but I feel like there's been some really good stuff that's come out of there that maybe people wouldn't expect from that kind of publication. And it's kind of good to challenge those perceptions as well, I think.
Yes, yeah. It is frustrating. Like, you know, I am probably the world's stupidest bitch. And I and one of the things that I love to do at Junkie, and one of the reasons why I love my job and the publication, is write stupid stuff, you know, like 2,000 word odes to Hugh Grant's hair, you know, like that's really important to me. And that's a really important part of like Junkie's tone and attitude. But I think that because, you know, or like, God, we published something about dump truck asses on like Pixar characters with dump truck asses or something like that. And it was like very funny. It was a very funny article. But I think people have a real issue putting that up against like the huge actual investigative reporting job that our former writer Sam Langford did, which into wage theft in certain retail franchises, which literally had the effect of shutting down those franchises. You know, like that's investigative journalism. Or like recently, we had a writer working for us, Jim Malo, who was doing amazing, like really amazing investigation and coverage of certain things and like really important issues. And people would constantly be like, wow, didn't expect to see this at Junkie. And it's like, well, we have actually been doing like some really good reporting as well. But also we've been doing some really good reporting on Pixar dump truck asses, and the two can be together. And I think that people just have an inability to see that a publication can be two things at once: incredibly stupid and also quite smart.
There's another question. Following on from Indio's question, Junkie launches a long-form section this year. Is that an attempt to fight back these non-real journalism stigma? And then this face.
Yes, that's my long reads initiative. That is a place to give more space to different types of journalism. I think because we one of the reasons that people sometimes didn't take our investigations seriously is that like a lot of the politics and analysis that we did fits into like fairly bite-sized 800 words to 1,500 word sort of pieces, which when you're reading off your phone, that's a good size article. So you don't want to have everything bigger. But I've just been really thinking that in order to kind of provide a bit more value content around proper analysis, and it's not just not just in sort of politics and analysis. Like I also want to look into long form culture analysis and long form entertainment, and do some like big profiles on celebrities and interviews and things like that. So yes, it is kind of it is a sort of a way of fighting back, but also just a way of kind of shifting what kinds of things that Junkie does. And I just don't want to be doing as many small stuff. And this is kind of insulting to the writers, but I think we've gotten to a point where shorter digital articles are being seen as kind of throwaway, which I really dislike. So I want to start doing something that shows that there is more worth, and also pay people more money, because that's also something I've been trying to do as editor since I took over last year. Just get more money to writers.
Yeah. Okay, someone said, some have argued that online culture publishing seems to have this cool vibe, which you need to be cool enough to write with a unique writing style. Okay, well, neither me or Patrick is very cool. So I think there is that really kind of online writing voice, which I actually find that a little bit labored and disingenuous sometimes, you can definitely weave your own voice into that somehow, but I think you can tell when someone's writing in a way that is trying to be a certain thing. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. I will quite often get first drafts from new writers, and they've written in what you can see is them trying to write in what they see as a junkie tone, and it'd be like, "What up, perverts?" No. That's totally lit. Whereas I don't need that. I just kind of want you to tell me about whether or not this Netflix show is fun. Yes, I think there is that view. What I'm more interested in is I am kind of interested in a unique writing style. I don't like getting bland, sort of by the numbers articles. I want to hear. I don't want to hear about people necessarily when they're writing about a TV show. I don't want you to be like, I was sitting in my room watching TV and then I had to think. I don't want to know about what you had for breakfast, but I do want to hear your voice in your writing, and I want to feel your sense of humor or your anger or your outrage or your depression. I don't know, whatever the article's about. I want to feel that. So I want to feel people's writing, and I want writing that makes me kind of say, this is cool and this is different. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm after someone cool. I wouldn't really know what to look for.
Yeah. Just on what you were just saying about people being so while I rode the train to work, I had this thought, blah. I used when I first started writing, especially review type stuff, I was I never want to use first person ever. I sort of think now that it's okay to do that, but only in specific circumstances and only if it works for what you're trying to do, right? Because I think if you're writing, let's say you're writing like a 200-word album review, props don't need to put I in there because there's so little space as it is, and you can just say what you think without saying, I think, blah. But again, sometimes that personal experience comes in a way that I think is interesting. So yes. I feel like as a writer over the last 10 or so years, the way that I think about things has changed, because I'm like, okay, saying I is not poisonous and it's not like bad necessarily. You just need to be selective about it. And I think sometimes my approach is kind of just to write whatever it is I'm writing and then like try to scrub myself out of it until all that's left of me in there is what absolutely needs to be there, basically. But yeah, I think that's a tricky balance to strike. It might be different for everybody.
I think it's a technique, and like any kind of writing technique, it needs to be done with competence and flair for it to work, you know. And I think that, so you know, I definitely don't have any rules against, like, strong rules against it.
Yeah.
Let's do more questions. I love these.
We missed one from like 10 min ago. How do you find and choose trends and discussions to report on, particularly if you don't have Twitter? Where do you go to for stories and sources when an article needs a quick turnaround? So I don't have Twitter, and I haven't for like 2.5 years, but I lurk heaps. So I still know what's going on, but I like never post. I don't know. Like, I guess most of the stuff that I'm pitching on is just about shows and stuff that are coming out, and a lot of the things that I write are just like extrapolating the themes from that movie or that show or that book or whatever it is. So Patrick, you might have more insight here than me.
Yeah, I mean, I do use Twitter as a source for topics of conversation that are happening around the world. I really do. I think that people are right to be cautious of like the Twitter only story, you know, like the thing that is happening on Twitter that day might not be particularly interesting to anyone off Twitter. So I think there is something to be cautious in that. That said, it is a great place just to see like what's happening and what people kind of immediately think of it. Like, I think a great example of that is when like the new Queer Eye, so there's been so many seasons now, it's practically ancient. But when Queer Eye came out, I remember watching that and being like, yeah, cool, you know, like great. I have like 2 thoughts that I want to put into an article, and I did, you know, in my review. But then I kept seeing, because I was like monitoring the Queer Eye hashtag while I was writing this article, just to, you know, see what the kind of public sentiment was. And then I just kept seeing people over and over writing, like, I just don't think Anthony can cook. Like, you know, why hasn't Anthony cooked anything yet? Why is he only just arranged avocado? And I was like, that's really funny. I'm going to write that up. And that ended up being like a kind of zeitgeisty article, because I was just keeping an eye on what like a lot of people outside of the media were saying. So I think that that's what you can use Twitter for. You can use other places for that as well. I do keep an eye on trending stuff on Instagram as well, because that's kind of closer to our like our demographic, and younger. Our demographic and younger use Instagram more than they use Twitter, so I keep an eye on that. I also, even though I hate Reddit with a fiery passion and I would never engage with it, I do look at Reddit a lot, because things that are trending on that are, you know, things that a lot of people are having a good conversation about. Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Where do you go for stories and sources when an article needs a quick turnaround? Yeah, I mean, I guess pretty much always social media usually.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, Victoria Cooper. Any tips on using humor in news writing without being tacky or cliche or straight up annoying? Well, I am really annoying, so I think, yeah, I feel like maybe it's a hard balance because I think we've all had that experience of reading an article and they're trying to be funny and it's just like heaps awkward and embarrassing. And or a bit like, how do you do fellow kids-ish?
I love those. I love those ones that sort of start off and it'll be like legislation has recently passed that could give new rights to this horribly disadvantaged part of society. Am I right? And you're like, well, you didn't need to add you didn't need to add anything to that, like at all. Yeah, look, one of the things that I say to my staff writers all the time is that, like, if there is something funny in a news story, let that funny thing speak for itself. Don't editorialize around it. So, like, I can't think of any good examples at the moment because the news has been routinely depressing for around 3 years, I would say. But sometimes there is like a spark of humor in the middle of the kind of like wasteland of sewage, and I'm always like, you don't need to kind of comment on that too much. You can just point that out as being funny, and that's funny writing rather than being like, whoa.
Why is Express Media sad facing at me? What did I say? Damn. Sorry.
I'm just hearing you talk.
How have/could/do you manage freelancing as a side hustle? Is freelancing a viable day job? I have freelanced full time in the past, but I do not currently. Oh, I said I was annoying. It's simply facts. So no, I have freelanced full time in the past, but for me, it just doesn't really suit my personality. And obviously, it's like super hustly, and I'm like not a hustler. But I mean, there are people that make it work. Although if you look at the figures for how much writers in Australia make, it's pretty grim. And a lot of writers that I know kind of balance it out by doing like speaking engagements or teaching or whatever. So I think that it is viable, but you kind of just have to patch together an income from various sources, and it probably won't always be purely writing. Or if it is writing, then it might also be like copywriting and corporate writing and stuff that's not like your passion.
Yeah. I freelanced as a day job for around 2 years. There was kind of in and out and other things going on. And I had I did that along with a marketing consultancy, small business that I started up as well. And the problem with that was that I was earning money from freelancing, but I was also fairly new in the industry. I had like a couple of publications that I already wrote for, but not heaps, and not heaps and heaps and heaps of connections. So I love to be transparent about this, because those 2 years where I freelanced, and 1 year in particular, was the most stressful period of my entire life, because I am a hustler and I kind of love hustling. I couldn't stop. I would work all night and all day sometimes until I just would collapse from exhaustion, just because I was too keyed up about the fact I had no money and I couldn't pay my rent next. So that my first year of freelancing, I managed to scrape together $30,000 over from the year and live off $30,000. So that included things like skipping the meal of lunch and, God, what else did I do? I moved back home for a little bit, which was awful because I didn't have a bed. Anyway, yeah, various things. So it's doable, but it's not. In my opinion, it's not something that you do lightly. It's a huge thing. So now people I know who freelance, they get most of their money from like regular contract work with media companies, and they do lots of like native and sponsored content writing, which, you know, that's where the good money is. So they'll write heaps and heaps and heaps of branded content, you know, or they have another job of copywriting and stuff on the side as well. So yes.
Yeah, because I think, like $30,000 would be a normal freelancing year for me as well. But then I have other jobs to kind of bring that up to a more livable kind of income. So I don't think it's not viable, but like Patrick said, it is stressful, and it depends on your personality as well, I think. Yeah, and I find really with freelance, it's like when it rains, it pours. Then sometimes there's nothing. And even if you think you have really good ideas, maybe nobody will want it. So it's hard to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah. Make sure you have around 3 to 4 weeks worth of money saved up for the Christmas holidays, because every editor goes on holidays and no one's commissioning anything. So, you know, suddenly all your money goes away.
Yeah.
Things like that.
This suddenly got very sad.
I mean, it's digital media. It's sad.
More questions. How do you know that your voice sounds genuine and authentic in your writing? Any tips on how to get your voice through onto paper? TBH, I think that you kind of just have to keep writing until you figure it out. That's like such an annoying answer, but I really think that that's true.
The thing that I think is like such a good thing to do with all your writing, and like is maybe genius. I might be talking myself up too much, but I think this might be genius advice. When you write your article, then read it out loud to yourself. Read it and not just like, you know, eyes glazed kind of out loud. Like, read it out loud as if you were performing a speech. And if you laugh at yourself, then it's probably bad writing, you know? Or if you think that sounds pretentious, it's probably pretentious. Or if you can't get a full sentence out because it's too long and convoluted, shorten it down, you know?
Hang on, when you say laugh at yourself, do you mean as in like, haha, I'm so funny, or like, haha, that's so shit?
Well, actually both, but like the first one's good, the second one's bad, you know? And I've definitely had both. Every so often when I write like serious stuff, I'll do that, and I'll be like, I sound like a pretentious little bitch. I'll just remove that like unnecessarily large word.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think that is a great way to get your voice across as well, because you're literally speaking it, you know. And like, I quite like more conversational toned pieces, not as a rule, but like I just quite like them. So when I feel like someone very smart and witty and funny is talking to me through an article, that's a great tone. So, you know.
Yeah. I also sort of feel like for my writing, I actually think that maybe I have like more than one voice, depending on what the thing is, maybe. Because I write so much different stuff. Like, some of my stuff is really serious and some is like so dumb. Like, I wrote an article for Patrick last year about like Dawson's dad dying in Dawson's Creek because he like ate an ice cream and drove off the road, you know. But actually at the same time, a friend was like, reading this, I can still tell that it's you, kind of thing. Even if it's about something really silly, writing something else that's about something really serious. But I don't know, like in terms of developing the voice, I really just think that it comes with just doing it heaps. And seeing what you feel comfortable with and natural, what feels natural as well. I think, like I said before, it's really obvious when people are just trying to embody a voice that might not be that natural for them, or like trying to embody that quote unquote like literary voice, which I actually don't find that interesting or original. So yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you take a break from information when your work requires you to keep an eye on online trends or discussion? You don't. Actually, like, I think that it's good to log off sometimes.
Oh, yeah. The short answer is you don't, because it's impossible, but you should. I burnt out really badly at the end of last year, because last year was obviously a horrible like trudge through depression and horror, and being completely engaged every single day with every aspect of the news and every aspect of oh my god, new cases, like watching every single press conference about like new coronavirus cases, and then also every other tragedy happening around the world, just became completely impossible to like deal with, I think. And I needed to find some sort of way to like manage that, I think, like log off, or like have times away from Twitter or something. But the unsustainable nature of my job meant that I couldn't, and there's no healthy way to fix that as my job currently stands, and I think it's a real problem. I ended up deleting all social media off my phone for around a week or two over the Christmas holidays, which was blessed. But yeah, this is a conversation, and it's a really good question. I think there's no good answer at the moment, and I certainly don't have it as someone who has just sort of slowly clawed their way back to sanity after a burnout.
Yeah. I think that even if the question is like, how do you take a break from it, you have to keep abreast of it for work. Even if you just limit yourself to checking news or Twitter or whatever, like X amount of times a day, like you don't have to constantly be scrolling. Like you actually don't. And actually you probably shouldn't. Something that has been really alarming for me, like in Corona, is seeing my screen time notifications. It's like, congratulations, it's down today. You only were on your phone for 11 hours. I'm like, oh my God. But
sometimes what gets me is I'll be at work on my work computer, and then I'll get a notification being like telling me that I've been on my phone all day too. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting multiple streams of poison sort of injected into my body through various orifices.
But yeah, for me, like I lurk Twitter heaps like throughout the day, but in the morning, like when I wake up, I'm like having a coffee or eating breakfast or whatever, like that is when I open the Guardian app on my phone and just like read the whole thing, basically. So I know what's happening. But yeah, honestly, like lurking Twitter means that I know things that I probably wouldn't know if I didn't. And I hate that, but it's just true. So yeah.
Yeah, look, I wake up at like 6:30 or 7, and the first thing I do is open my Twitter account to check what's trending, because I have a writer usually working that morning who needs to be writing about whatever the biggest news story is. And it is the worst way to start a morning in the world. Like any sort of sense of happiness or like enjoyment or like rest that you've had immediately sort of like moves away once you sort of like open up. And and also Twitter's toxic, so usually it's just like a million transphobes like screaming abuse at me, and then like in between that, horrible world news. So yeah, bad vibes.
Yay. I'm sure we're like instilling so much like hope and happiness in people right now.
Yeah, it's a bit grim, isn't it? There is one last question, which is a nice one. So should we do that, and then, because we've only got like 5 minutes left?
Yeah, true. Or if anyone else has any other burning questions, pop them in.
Pop them in and speed round them.
Okay. What do you actually enjoy writing or editing the most? So, like, I have been an editor in the past, but I'm not really presently. But I really enjoy editing, actually. Like, it's really nice to be able to tell people what I think about things and be in a kind of dialogue with them about, like, what their ideas are and how to make those ideas come to life in the best way. And, like, conversely, I also really like doing that with good editors who are engaging with my work. But what do I actually like writing the most? I really like writing like really big, long, thinky things about like books or whatever it is that kind of draw from a lot of different areas. So the kind of writing that I'm trying to move into doing more of is like writing about a book or whatever, but then drawing from other books and maybe making it more into a kind of cultural commentary thing than a straight review. So that's the kind of writing that I'm trying to get into doing. And that's like one of my favorite things to read as well. And I think it's like kind of cliche when people say that if you want to be a good writer, you have to read widely, but it's actually just true. So,
I find editing really rewarding, and there's a lot about it that I really really have grown to unexpectedly love. Like I always knew that I quite enjoyed the structural part of it, but like the whole sort of practice of like commissioning the right voice and sort of finding the right take for someone else rather than yourself. Really rewarding, and I really love it, and it's something that I like didn't expect to love as much as I did. And like the pride that I take when like someone's wonderful piece, which I've helped kind of like birth into awful society, like sort of goes out and gets appreciated. Like I'm like, I helped with that. That's really lovely. And that's a really nice sort of like gently proud feeling. But I'm a massive narcissist first and foremost, and I love writing. I love the act of writing. Like I love sitting down and writing for an entire day. It's I don't like sitting down and writing lots of different things all day. Like, but back when I was a staff writer, I had to write lots of different news pieces. I didn't love that. I would much prefer to write like one feature or one story or, you know, one essay or whatever I'm doing all day. I actually have a great time typing, which I know a lot of writers don't. I love the process of like, you know, sending it out and, you know, getting, you know, praise or criticism or anything like that. I love writing. It's so great. I want to get back to doing more of it because I'm like pretty much, I would say at the moment I'm like 99% an editor, and I don't get to write very much. Cool. Well, I think that's
last mini questions, or are we done?
Are we done, or is there like one last? Like, imagine if someone just was like, "What is digital media?"
Maybe we're done. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thanks for all your questions. It was great.
Yeah, and not being annoyed at our like in jokes. People who do that are annoying, but yeah.
It was lovely to meet you, Giselle.
So nice to meet you too. Thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your weekend.
Bye.